Makebi's shocking economic theory explained. He said, "What? Zambia's economic debate has become loud, emotional, and deeply polarized. But today, we are pressing pause on the shouting. No spin. No commentary. No political filters. Tonight, we examine Makebi Zulu's economic argument using his own words, exactly as spoken. What is he really saying about Zambia's economy? Is it a warning, a critique, or an alternative vision? Let's listen carefully. Because in politics, what is said often matters less than how it is understood. Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of the InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. It's been quite a week here, hasn't it? The coffee's been strong, the debate's even stronger, and today we've got something that's been setting the economic world absolutely ablaze. Our lead story: an economist just shattered every rule you thought you knew about money. Picture this, a packed auditorium in Nairobi. The air thick with anticipation. Cameras rolling. And then, from behind that podium, comes a statement so audacious, so fundamentally radical, that it sends shockwaves rippling through universities, central banks, and finance ministries across the continent. Dr. Samuel Makebi, a name you might not have known last month but one you certainly won't forget today, stands before the assembled economists, policymakers, and journalists, and declares something that contradicts centuries of economic orthodoxy. But what exactly did he say? What theory could possibly cause veteran economists to literally walk out of the conference room? What idea was so dangerous, so revolutionary, that within hours it had ministers calling emergency meetings and Twitter erupting in a frenzy of disbelief? Was this the breakthrough Africa has been waiting for? Or was it economic heresy that could unravel the very fabric of our financial systems? And perhaps most troubling of all, what if Makebi is right? What if everything we've been taught about wealth creation, poverty alleviation, and economic development has been backwards this entire time? What would that mean for our governments? For our policies? For the millions struggling to make ends meet? And why are some of the continent's most powerful people desperately trying to silence him? Factual foundation. The revelation came to light on November 18, 2024, at the East African Economic Summit held at the Kenyatta International Convention Center in Nairobi, Kenya. Dr. Samuel Makebi, a 42-year-old economist from Uganda with a doctorate from the London School of Economics, had been invited as a panel speaker on innovative approaches to African economic growth. He was scheduled for a modest 20-minute presentation slot at 2:30 p.m., hardly the keynote address. The conference organizers expected a routine academic discourse. They had no idea what was coming. The first whispers began circulating during the lunch break. Delegates noticed Makebi huddled with a small group of younger economists, frantically scribbling equations on napkins. Something was brewing. When Makebi took the stage that afternoon, he began conventionally enough, thanking the organizers, acknowledging his fellow panelists. But 5 minutes in, everything changed. He clicked to a slide titled "The Inversion Principle: Why We've Been Building Economies Upside Down." The room fell silent. What followed was a 35-minute presentation. Makebi ignored his time limit entirely, that systematically dismantled the foundational assumptions of neoclassical economics as applied to developing nations. By minute 15, 3 senior economists from the World Bank delegation had quietly exited. By minute 25, Kenya's deputy finance minister was on his phone, presumably with Nairobi. By the time Makebi concluded, half the room was on their feet, some applauding wildly, others shouting objections. The theory? Makebi proposed what he called inverse capitalism. The controversial notion that African nations should deliberately deprioritize foreign direct investment, reject traditional GDP growth metrics, and instead build economies from what he termed the poverty point upward rather than the wealth point downward. By evening, #Makebi theory was trending across East African Twitter. By the next morning, it had gone continental. Direct evidence. Let me take you directly to Makebi's own words from that presentation. We obtained the full transcript, and it's extraordinary. Here's how he began his bombshell section. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to commit what many in this room will consider economic blasphemy. But I ask you, I beg you, to hear me out. Because what I'm about to propose isn't just theory. It's backed by data we've been deliberately ignoring for 60 years. He paused. You can hear it on the recording, took a sip of water, and continued. We've been told, haven't we, that economic development follows a clear path? Attract foreign investment. Build infrastructure. Encourage entrepreneurship. Create jobs. Generate GDP growth. And somehow, magically, prosperity will trickle down to the masses. This is the gospel according to the IMF, the World Bank, every development economics textbook. But here's the uncomfortable truth, it hasn't worked. Not in the way we promised. Not at the scale we promised. And it never will, because the model is fundamentally, architecturally flawed. At this point, the transcript notes, murmuring in audience. Makebi pressed on. So here's what I propose instead, and I want you to follow this carefully. What if we stop trying to build rich economies that eventually help poor people? What if we started building economies that are designed from the ground up around the poorest citizen? Not as an afterthought. Not as a social program. But as the core structural principle. A reporter from Business Daily Africa asked, Dr. Makebi, are you suggesting we should reject all foreign investment? His response was striking. I'm saying we should reject dependent foreign investment. There's a difference. When Samsung builds a factory in Rwanda, that's one thing. When a mining company extracts Congolese cobalt for pennies on the dollar while the profits flow to Switzerland. That's not investment. That's extraction with a business card. We need to fundamentally reframe what we even mean by economic partnership. Another voice, identified as Dr. Patricia Omondi from the University of Nairobi, challenged him. But Dr. Makebi, without those GDP growth numbers, how do we attract the capital we need for infrastructure development? Listen to how he answered. Dr. Omondi, respectfully, you're still thinking inside the box. You're asking, how do we get the money we need? I'm asking, why do we need money from people who don't care if we succeed? China built its economy without begging the West for loans. Singapore did it. Vietnam did it. They had vision, they had discipline, and this is crucial, they had economic sovereignty. Not GDP growth charts to impress London investors. Sovereignty. The recording captures several people talking over each other at this point. One voice rises above the rest. Later identified as an economist from the Ministry of Finance. This is dangerously idealistic. You're talking about isolation. About turning our backs on the global economy. Makebi's reply came fast. No sir, I'm talking about entering the global economy on our terms, not as supplicants. There's a profound difference. We have resources. We have labor. We have markets. We have everything except self-belief and the courage to build differently. Deeper analysis. So what are we really looking at here? The implications of Makebi's theory extend far beyond academic debate, they strike at the heart of how African nations have approached development since independence. The political reactions have been swift and deeply divided. Kenya's finance ministry released a carefully worded statement the day after the conference, calling Makebi's ideas thought-provoking but requiring rigorous empirical validation before policy consideration. Translation? We're not touching this with a 10-foot pole yet. Uganda's government, interestingly, has been more receptive. The Minister of State for Economic Planning, Rebecca Kadaga, told journalists, Dr. Makebi is asking questions that frankly we should have been asking decades ago. We're not endorsing every aspect of his theory, but we'd be foolish not to examine it seriously. Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, nations already pursuing somewhat unconventional economic paths, have remained conspicuously quiet, though sources suggest high-level discussions are happening behind closed doors. Opposition parties across the region, meanwhile, have seized on Makebi's theory as vindication. Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga tweeted, "Finally, an economist brave enough to say what we've known all along, the emperor has no clothes." Ghana's former president John Mahama called it a necessary disruption to neo-colonial economic thinking. But the economic establishment? They're pushing back hard. The African Development Bank issued what can only be described as a rebuttal, arguing that sustainable development requires integration with global capital markets, not isolation from them. The World Bank's regional director for East Africa warned against economic nationalism that could undermine decades of progress. International economists have been equally dismissive or concerned. Harvard's Jeffrey Sachs, when asked about Makebi's theory, said it represents well-intentioned but economically illiterate populism. London School of Economics' own faculty, Makebi's alma mater, issued a statement distancing themselves from his extreme interpretations. Yet here's where it gets interesting. Several prominent African economists, people with World Bank and IMF pedigrees, have quietly reached out to Makebi expressing support, though most won't go on record. One told our sources, "He's saying what many of us think but are too afraid to say publicly. Our careers depend on maintaining orthodoxy. The legal and procedural questions are equally thorny. Could a nation actually implement inverse capitalism without violating WTO agreements? International trade treaties? Existing loan conditions?" Makebi argues these structures themselves are the problem, that they're designed to perpetuate dependency. But unwinding them? That's legally complex, diplomatically dangerous, and economically risky. And then there are the unresolved questions at the theory's core. How exactly do you measure success if not through GDP? How do you fund large-scale infrastructure without foreign capital? What about countries already deep in debt to international creditors? Can they simply pivot to a new model? Makebi acknowledges these challenges but insists they're surmountable. Difficult isn't the same as impossible. South Korea was poorer than Kenya in 1960. Look at them now. The difference wasn't resources. It was vision and sovereignty. But perhaps the most profound implication is this: if Makebi is even partially correct, it means that generations of African policymakers, educated at Western institutions, implementing Western-designed structural adjustment programs, may have been actively, if unintentionally, perpetuating the very poverty they sought to eliminate. That's not just an economic theory. That's an indictment of the entire post-colonial development project. No wonder people are uncomfortable. So where does this leave us? With more questions than answers, perhaps, but sometimes, the right questions matter more than comfortable answers. Thank you so much for watching today's edition. This is clearly a story that's far from over. Dr. Makebi has agreed to a follow-up interview with us next week, where we'll dive even deeper into the specifics of his inverse capitalism model. And trust me, you won't want to miss that. I want to hear from you in the comments. Is Makebi a visionary or a dangerous idealist? Have we really been building economies upside down? What would an economic system designed from the poverty point upward actually look like in practice? Share your thoughts, economists, students, policymakers, everyday citizens. Everyone's voice matters in this conversation. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories shaping our continent, but something tells me we'll be talking about this one for years to come. Until then, this is Nakash, reminding you to question everything, even, especially, the things we've always assumed were true. Stay informed, stay inspired, and we'll see you tomorrow.